I am so excited to introduce you all to one of the most iconic people in the business of fashion today. She is truly one of a kind as an individual. From the day that I first met her, as we geared up for a collaboration between her brand, Alice and Olivia, and my brand, Lovesack, I could sense she was a lot more down to earth and real than one might think, given her polished and distinct persona as a living, breathing fashion icon. You can find her high fashion, bright and beautiful designs at the most sophisticated retailers in over 800 locations and more than 50 of her own Alice and Olivia wholly owned boutiques around the world, despite the fact her name is neither Alice or Olivia. Her designs are loved by Gwyneth Paltrow, Gigi Hadid, Kourtney Kardashian, my wife, Tiffany Nelson, just to name a few. Spend any time on her social media and you'll understand she's a master yogi, more flexible than any other human that I know, a wonderful mother of three, and fierce business leader, chief executive, even while being a real deal designer, chief creative, so powerful in her persona. She has her own illustrated character. I'm super jealous. Welcome to the show, Ms. Stacey Bendet.
Wait, should we like turn my face into a cartoon after this podcast?
Ooh,
I should be an animation. I was a GIF. I was a little GIF for a while, but
have you thought about having your own animated TV show? Because I think you totally.
I get pitched all the time to be like a reality show, but I actually, I could not do it. And I'd like to tell you that my life is boring, but it's not. But there's like always so much drama and always something so crazy happening that like the idea of having a camera following it is too much.
Yeah.
But a cartoon, maybe a cartoon.
The cartoon's kind of cool. And plus you're already kind of there.
Yeah. Right.
And with the whole Barbie thing, I feel like there's a movement that you could just grab.
Right. And also be like the real version of that, where it's like really about like not the doll version, but the real working version.
Dude, I have a guy before we're done, let's talk about that. Seriously, I think that is brilliant and beautiful, and I would want my daughters to watch that.
And yes, well, that's my whole thing is even with Barbie, you know, like we want things that like I was conflicted over Barbie because I was like, is this really what I want my children seeing and learning from? And I really try to always have I have 3 daughters, you know, around women who are good role models and inspiring. And I think the media needs a little bit more of that. I think we keep trying to like turn like Disney films and old doll properties upside down, but we really need like modern versions of role models for modern young women today. So maybe I need to be a cartoon. Who knows?
I think that is brilliant. I mean, you probably came up with that already, but I think that is a really brilliant direction, and I would support it and help you in any way I could.
Thank you.
That's cool. I have daughters that almost match up with yours. I have a 15, 11, and 9-year-old daughter myself.
Yep, almost exact same ages.
So I know all about it.
Yeah, it's wild.
I'm
wild ride. Wild ride. I know.
Yeah, and they're so beautiful and capable, and I hope that they can aspire to people.
But like they never fight, right?
No, never.
Mine either. Never. It's so weird.
No drama. Yeah,
unless someone's Sephora package is touched by another, then you know it's like the world ended.
Oh yeah, we have world-ending moments almost daily in the Nelson house.
Always over like some sort of cosmetic product or hair tool.
Full meltdown.
Full done. Day
Physical
over.
Altercations. All of it.
Yeah.
All right. So this week's Shawnism from the book Be An Insatiable Learner has guided me perhaps my whole life, but really became poignant in my 20s when I was probably too prideful, honestly, to seek out like top tier mentors and partners like you did. And so I got it from books in my case, but I didn't love working the room and networking, you know, to get places. So I just read every book, blog, article I could get my hands on all the time, audiobooks, driving, etc. Learn is what I say. And it has served me really well. I'm still devouring information. So I'd love to just hear from you, Stacy, as a fellow traveler. When you heard the topic, Be an Insatiable Learner, what came to mind for you?
Well, I think first it's that like I'm a generally curious person. And there were periods throughout my career where I just wanted to learn about, like, I still to this day like learning about making new types of clothing, like a new technique, a new technology, a new fabric, a new way to like laser wash denim. So I've always really loved to learn about new things, whether it's new fabrics, whether it's new machinery. But when it comes to like actual learning, I think that entrepreneurs in general are always curious people. Like I can get just as absorbed in learning about something around clothing as I can about, my friends always joke that I'll like send them articles in the middle of the night about like, something around mental health or wellness or, some new like beauty device that transforms your skin. But I love to read about things and I love to learn and I sort of get really absorbed in things. But I think that's a commonality amongst entrepreneurs. In terms
Yeah.
of like business development and growth, I kind of always look for mentors and I try to teach my teams never to be afraid to say you don't know something, but always make sure you ask the question, right? I think a lot of times people are afraid to admit that they don't know something or they don't understand something. Like I'll sit in a meeting and I think probably like you, when I first started the company, I was involved in like everything, right? Everything. But I remember day one, I was like, first hire, I need a bookkeeper and a finance person because I knew that wasn't my strength. So I think while learning is so important and being an absorber of information to improve is important, what's also really important is acknowledging that like no one can do everything and there's certain areas where you have strengths and certain areas where just as a human you have weaknesses, identifying those and knowing where to hire people better than you.
Oh man, that's a huge topic in the book. It's something I'm passionate about. And look, what's crazy is, and I don't know if you feel the same way, but for me anyway, I'm like the dumbest person in the room now.
Yeah,
Like as the company's gotten huge, and I've hired people that
yeah.
have
You're
huge company
sitting
back. It's
there.
not just yeah,
No, like you'll be sitting in a room with like, these 25-year-olds that have like, like I don't know, NASA level like experience when it comes
mhm,
to ecom, and you're like, yeah, that sounds good.
yeah,
Um, but again, I take pride rather than feel, sort of old and, uneducated in those areas. I have a lot of pride that within my company, we've begun to hire such intelligence and strength.
yeah. Oh, for
But
sure. I mean,
but
I
definitely,
couldn't
I think it's like I like being the dumbest person in the room. I'm cool with that.
absolutely. I couldn't be more proud. I mean, and these are people that are making me successful. I get so much credit for it as you do too, as the face of the brand. But in reality, you're building an organization that can create thousands of jobs,
Yeah,
opportunities around the world. Even the sewers that make my Lovesac covers in Asia, I know some of them personally.
yeah.
To me, that's still part of the outcome that I'm most proud of. And it comes back to, my willingness to be at least humble enough. I wasn't humble enough to get great mentors, honestly, but I was humble enough to hire great people ultimately and to learn along the way from all these other sources. And thankfully, made it somewhere over
Now,
these
now your
25.
mentor, you do have mentors. They're just like 25-year-olds.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, younger than me, older than me,
But it's
like
yeah, but it's acknowledging that change, right? Like when you're young, you have to be okay with like older people. I mean, like educating you, telling you things, and you what you think is right and what's not. And I think as we get older, our companies get older, sometimes it's really important to like acknowledge the talent. Your company becomes more complicated. Like think about when you started, you had to like get the
mhm.
stuff made and sell it, right? The world today and the way we operate a business today is so much more complicated when you're operating a global business, DTC, e-com, everything. I mean, it is way more complicated than when it was like, hey, let's get this made. It's cute.
Right. Yeah.
Let's go sell a few of them.
I love that you have navigated this in a way where you're both the CEO of this business and a true creative designer. I mean, there are plenty of people with fashion lines, as you and I both know, but they're not all designers. And there are plenty, and on top of that, you're the face of the brand in a way that not everyone can pull off.
I oversee the whole design team at this point. Like I call my role more creative director, because there are, I have a young, amazing team, and like different teams that do different categories of design. And like I oversee it all. So I'm working with them every day. I oversee all the fittings, concepts, colors, all of that. But like, I call myself at the end of the day the creative director, because the designers are the ones working on the tech packs and the specs and the the details that go into each piece of clothing, and then I get to kind of like oversee it all and bring it together.
Yeah, I think a little bit similar in my organization, in the sense that I consider myself a designer. I graduated from Parsons with a master's. In fact, I went back and got that when I was in my late 30s.
Wow. That's
I just believe in
education. You're a learner.
Right? Weird, right?
Yeah.
And then I taught there in their master's program, down the street from you in New York, and I loved it. But I'm not a classical designer, and I have many of them working for me, or engineer. I think like a designer and engineer, but I'm not a trained one. And I have great respect for those that have the long training it takes to be, let's say, just a classically trained designer, whether it's fashion, whether it's engineering, whether it's, industrial design. And I try to leave the designing to the designers. And that's a crazy thing to do as a designer, but I believe in that.
I didn't come up from a traditional background of like going to Parsons or going to FIT. I went to Penn. And I always say like the first few years of Alice and Olivia were like my design school, because I had to learn everything. I had taught myself how to sew. I taught myself how to, do the basics, but then I had to learn about production and pattern making. And when I was really young, I used to actually rollerblade down to the sample room where our samples were made. And I would literally if I didn't get there before 8:00, the pattern maker wouldn't work with me, because she was busy with like theory and, all the big brands. And so, I mean, that's always like, it was such funny memories when you think back, because she would teach me things when I was there, and I would, get all my pant patterns fixed and whatever. But like, that was kind of the world back then. I mean, you would, and then you'd bring your pattern over to the sample room and get it cut. And, it was very old school. Like now things are much more high tech, and my designers are working in like crazy complicated programs and sending everything overseas to Asia. And it's like a whole different world.
Yeah, but the basic principles underlying that are the same. And the fact that you learned them by doing in a traditional way, let's call it that, is so useful. Like for me, in just the long, I just couldn't afford, enough people. So I was doing all the sourcing. I'm over in Asia. I know exactly how this fabric behind me, I know how it's milled. I know, the fabric weight. I know everything there is to know about bonding, weaving, knitting, and I've become some kind of fabric expert by accident, just by doing.
That's so funny. You know who you need to meet is my dad. My dad was in the fabric business forever. I mean, he knows more about materials and actually making fabric than like anyone you'll ever meet. You would love him. He's amazing.
I would love to.
But that was when I was in like my 20s. I went over to Asia all the time, and similarly, like I remember when I was 20, maybe 4 or 5. I was making cashmere sweaters for the first time, and the qualities kept coming in totally different. And it would say all the same information, this is 12 gauge, this is 14 gauge. And I was like, these are not the same. And so I went to Mongolia, but this was like a long time ago. Like no one really went to Mongolia, but I wanted to see where the cashmere came from. And my dad said to me, look them in the eye and tell them you want to understand it. And no one will send you like fake, or inconsistent yarn anymore. And he was right. And after that, like I had the best quality cashmere, because I went over there and I watched them spin it, and I learned how they thinned it, and, and finished it.
And you can just tell. You can just take something that, your designers give you, and just by picking it up. And that's how I am. And that's been useful. Even as a business person now, you're more of a CEO, I'm sure, than a fashion designer per se. You have to be at your scale. But you have the foundation. I think that's so valuable, and it can't be overlooked.
Well, and yeah, I mean, to this day, like I can look across the room and be like, that's not the right fabric. That's not the same as that one when it's sample yardage or whatever else. So I definitely I guess have an eye for fabric and a lot of experience with that. But I also think that, I think when you're a person who's just passionate about product, how it looks, how it feels, how it fits, that's really important. And I think one of the things that Andrew, who's my mentor and partner, always taught me was that at the end of the day, you have to be proud of the product you're making. And, when business is tough or when you're going through a hard time, like, go back to the product. Like, what are you making? How are you making it? Are you proud of it? And that always helps me to kind of like simplify and take a step back when I feel like I'm, in a tough place. Just kind of going back to those basics and like reminding myself how much I love product.
I love that. So tell me this, how has this idea of being an insatiable learner come into play in your personal life, in your real life, and whether mom, whether
I mean, I think it helps me very often as a parent, because whenever my kids have any sort of issue, like, I'm the one who like deep dives into things. I mean, one of my daughters had an esotropia and, needed her, like, had to have eye surgery. And, I'm the one that like digs in, finds every specialist, knows the top doctors, like my other daughter had scoliosis. I'm the one that's like, like knows every surgeon in the city. So I guess in a weird way, like, I take that learning into my parenting, but I love to research and I love to learn and I love to curate. And I feel like a lot of times, even when you're doing things as a parent, you're still like team building, right? Like, one of your children has scoliosis and you're coming up with like, who's the best team to fix this? I think it's the same thing that I do at work, right? Like, I'm like, okay, we need this surgeon, we need, this chiropractic specialist, we need this Schroth therapy, we need this, and you put that team together. So I think that my love of learning is also has it's like a love of like project building and team building too, which is the same thing at work, right? Like, you decide to do something and I'm like, okay, team, let's go. And so, and I love learning about new things. I love learning about, anything from fashion to science to, anything that is pertaining to my kids. So I think just, again, when you're a curious person, I think all entrepreneurs are like inherently curious people.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's so cool. I think it's easy for people maybe to see someone like you and think, well, you probably have people for that. You probably have I don't know, who knows, a nanny or and not to say you don't have people in your life helping you, but it sounds to me like you're very hands-on when it comes to the things that really matter to you.
Yes.
And being really plugged in and being willing to get into the weeds even.
I think though at work I've had to learn to create teams and be able to like entrust them to do things themselves. And sometimes that's hard, sometimes I'm like, I do, kind of hop in and micromanage things. I find it really hard with things that are like, that very much have to do with the brand, like social media and marketing and things like that. Like, those are really hard areas for me to pass off. But I've tried over the years, like I said before, to always hire people that are better than you. Like, you have to find a stylist who can style better than you. And then you can come in and give your input, but you're not going to be there at every e-com shoot putting shoes on, right? So, you've got to build and sort of manage up a little bit.
Yeah, it's one of the things I talk about in the book as well is, entrepreneurs are good at a lot of things naturally. I mean, that's what got you to some level of success. And so it can be hard to let go of things that you're pretty good at.
Yeah.
And in fact, you might even be better in some ways, in some respect than a certain stylist, a certain designer, who knows what, right? Or even a business person on your team, a marketing person, a social media person, who knows? Like, your instincts might be better.
Yeah.
But holistically, if you hang on to everything, you'll never scale. And by the way, a key lesson I learned is, like, just because they might do something differently and how they do it would be different than how I would have done it, doesn't mean the way they did it was bad. It's just a different way.
Right.
And I've had to grow okay with that as I've learned.
Yeah. No, sometimes I'm like, no, that's just bad.
Yeah, there's that too. So,
I've also
and by the way, how do
like,
you share that? How do you share that
well,
sentiment
it's
when you
so
feel that
funny.
way?
Cheryl Sandberg came to my office the other day,
Yeah.
and I was we went upstairs to see the showroom, and there was a rack and it was on the wrong side of the room, and I was like, hey guys, I know I sound crazy, but I would put the rack on this side because the light hits this way, and when people photograph it, it's going to be there. And she goes, why are you apologizing? You're doing what every woman does. Like, you say something that you know is right, and that you know as a boss is what you want and what's actually, the best decision, and you're apologizing for it. Why are you apologizing? She's like, be the boss. You're the boss, and you're a great boss. And I was like, you're right. I do that all the time, because I get, as women, I think if a man says something, he's just like, hey, move the rack. As a woman, like, you don't want to sound bossy, you don't want to sound too demanding. But over the last couple of weeks since she visited, I was like, hey guys, I'm just going to go back to being bossy. But like, with all of like cancel culture and, a lot of the movements that I think have presented over the last couple of years, we're all a little bit like, can we say it? Do we say it okay? Is it okay that we don't like it?
Yeah.
And she was like, it's your brand. If you don't like it, say it. So I've actually reverted a little bit lately to being like, no, I actually really don't like that. And while I'm entrusting you to make this or to be in charge of this, I also have to make sure that it feels right for my brand.
Yeah.
Because that still is my role, right? That's so it might be great, but it's not right for this. And I'll say, I think this is great, just not right for what we're doing here.
Yeah. So there's still a softening, because you're still trying to keep people motivated and not just disillusion them.
Yes. And sometimes I'm good at that, and sometimes I'm like a little too bossy, and I'll just say, guys, I'm bossy.
Takes a lot of discipline, managing one's own language, one's own behavior, one's own tendencies. Sure.
Yes. And I think when I am being, sort of specific or bossy or whatever you want to call it, it's because it is sort of my job to make sure that everything we put out into the world feels on brand, right? And you probably know this, but as soon as you do things that don't feel on brand, like, everyone can get like very quickly, especially creative people, they're like, oh, that's our new direction, and all of a sudden everything like kind of changes to take a different route. So I try to be like pretty specific about what's right and what's not for the brand.
And how is that more intuitive, or is that something you've learned over time?
I mean, there's certain things like, okay, so on social media and our marketing, I always like us to be like inspiring and to make women feel good. But sometimes we can be funny too, but not snarky. So like, I don't believe in trying to be like funny in a way that can make someone feel bad just to get clicks or likes or anything else. So there's this fine line between doing stuff that's like a little bit witty and a little bit funny and a little bit, self-deprecating at times, or things that are really beautiful, but also thinking about our brand in a way that's just as much about clothing as it is about encouraging women to feel like they're best versions of themselves, right? So there's certain ethoses that I give the teams, and everything that we put out there, share, do, needs to really follow that. But creatively, it can be hard because creative people see creative things differently. Like, to my eye, it's often like really obvious what looks chic or good or on brand and what doesn't. And sometimes there's things that I'm like, that's great, I love it, but it just looks too young for what we're trying to do right now, or it looks, too X, Y, or Z. But those are things that I think any creative brand has to do. And sometimes you want to change direction, and then you've got to get the whole teams thinking in a different way. That's hard too.
It's got to be hard in your industry as well, in the context of Anna Wintour and Devil Wears Prada, and just that whole vibe that high fashion can put off.
Yeah. Well, I think your brand's similar to this, but like, sorry to interrupt you, but like, from day one, when I started Alice and Olivia, I said, I want every woman who walks in our office to feel welcomed and great. And I want the same thing in our stores. I don't want women to walk in our stores and feel like self-conscious or like they're not good enough or rich enough or special enough to be there. I want them to walk in and be like embraced and given a hug, a smile. I want someone to talk to them, not be pushy, but make them know and feel like they are welcome in this space, like it's my home, whether it's our office or a store. And I think over the years, that's been such an important part of our retail culture and things women really appreciate. They're like, the girls in your stores are always so nice and make me feel so good when I'm there. And that's what I want, because clothes are personal expression. Like,
Yeah.
clothes should make you feel not just beautiful, but strong, empowered, happy, uplifted when you put them on.
Yeah.
And the person showing you those clothes, helping style you in those clothes, or selling you those clothes, has to make you feel that way too.
I love that. I love this about your brand, that despite you're in this industry where some brands have done quite well with a high degree of snobbery or exclusivity. And it's not to
Yes.
say that your brand is not exclusive or high fashion. Of course it is. It's one of the most. But the accessibility of the brand all the way to you, who's even willing to, do this podcast with me and always be accessible at a certain level, that's on brand for you. You've obviously had success. And look, I think if you had to choose one or the other, not just as a brand strategy, but as a human being on the earth, I choose yours.
Right, but it's, I think that from when I started, we've always sat in the contemporary world of fashion, right? So you had, like, when I started, it was like there was runway, there was contemporary, and then there was high fashion, which was more like street, and fast fashion brands. And what I love about the contemporary world is you can kind of bridge both, right?
Mm,
Like, you can make clothes that are quite couture and very designer feeling and beautiful, but you're also putting them at a price point that's generally accessible.
yeah.
And that was important to me too, because anyone can make one beautiful dress. But to me, what's more exciting is making that pant or dress that thousands of women want to wear, right? And to make things at a price that allows women to wear your clothes. It's, you can make a, $50,000 insane couture gown, but one person is going to wear that one time.
Yeah.
I like the world of fashion. I think similar to like you in the, in the home world, where it's actually things people are wearing and using.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, our stuff's expensive, but it's not
Yeah.
stupid, and it's accessible to everyone if they're willing to stretch a little. And look, for the very high end, our stuff is probably too plain and will be relegated to the basement. We'll take the basement though, because that's where they actually hang out with their kids,
Yeah,
you
that's
know?
where they're hanging out and using it, right? Like, you're not usually like sitting in your fancy living room, right? So I think, yeah, I think that I've sort of, I love the democratization of fashion. I
Yeah.
think the days of fashion being overly elitist are sort of over, because
Mm,
in our world today, like, if you were being real about this, like teenagers and TikTok are driving trends.
yeah.
It's not coming from the upper echelons of the magazines and editorial
Hmm.
world. It's literally coming from the masses, which, is a big shift in consumerism in general, but also something that's, kind of interesting and fun for brands to react to.
I love that. So, any advice to people who maybe are not an entrepreneur, not a business leader, a CEO, what have you, maybe in a normal, job or building an organization that they're proud of or whatever, on this idea of being an insatiable learner, how it might apply? We've talked a lot about being an entrepreneur, what have you, but how do you think about it through that lens?
Well, I think the first thing is deciding what you love. So, like, when you know what you love to do and what you love to learn about, it makes your work really more fun,
Mm,
right? Because if you can apply that in some way, maybe you love the law. Like, how do you bring that into what you're doing at work,
yeah.
right? Maybe you love art history. So how do you bring that into like your printmaking and your print design? Maybe you love baking. Are you going to make everyone happy in the office every day, like bringing in cookies? I don't
Mhm.
know, but like, I think you can take your love of learning and use that to just make improvements and changes to what you're doing at work every day. Whether you're the boss, the owner, someone who just works at a
Yeah.
company, but if you start each day thinking like, what do I really love and what makes me happy? I have a
Yeah.
friend who um, loved exercise her whole life, but like worked in fashion, but was like obsessed with exercise and exercise classes, and she just went out on her own and is starting this whole like exercise class concept. And I'm so proud of her, because she took what she really loved and now is applying her knowledge of marketing and PR and everything else to that. Um, so I encourage people to be insatiable learners, but try and apply that to what you really love to do.
Yeah, I love that. That's great advice. If you love the subject matter in one way or another, you're willing to go deep, even on your spare time, thinking about learning about that subject matter because it's fun for you. It's entertaining. It's
Yeah.
interesting. And then your job doesn't have to suck quite so bad. So finding that alignment
Yes.
is great.
In something, you know, let's say, you know, again, you're a print designer, like, but what's your passion, right? And bring that into what you're doing. You're an accountant, but well, that's a tough one. I don't know what people love about
No, I know.
accounting, but
Listen,
you know
I
what I
know
mean?
people
Like,
who are.
yeah, people love it. Like, what is it about numbers? Go learn about like new systems for improving it. Like, you can take what you love and use it and I also constantly tell people, like, if there are things you see in the company or in your job that can be better, whether it's our computer systems, whether it's our accounting templates, whether it's our, you know, process for this, like use your voice and make it better. Don't be like, oh, this is so tedious, this is whatever. Like, bring it, you know?
Yeah.
So
great.
I think I always like to encourage people to like use their voice to create change.
And how do you practice being an insatiable learner today? You know, are you a reader? Are you a podcaster? Are you interested? Like,
I'm an article reader. I have a very short attention span. Like, books are hard for me. Like, I read 2 pages and then I'm like, I think I want to paint those flowers on the ceiling a different shade of aqua. You know, like, I'm a little like, but I'm an article I got. Like,
cool.
I read tons of articles.
Like, where do you find them? What's your source? What's your best?
I read a lot of stuff through like Apple News, but within Apple News, I'm like reading Science Times. I read this like New Beauty that always has like new medical stuff. I read a lot of stuff about like psychology and, you know, different type of mental health and wellness initiatives and all kinds of like Spectrum News. I read just like I'll read things in the Wall Street Journal. I also love real estate. Whether it's inspiration for like new stores or whether I'm looking at interior inspiration, like it's all part of design to me. I love reading like Architectural Digest. And you know, it's funny, I love fashion magazines, but I sort of limit that because like if it's at after hours or at night or whatever, like it gets my mind spinning.
Yeah.
So I read things almost like outside of my world. And then of course, like Business of Fashion, and other like industry news outlets are always important to know kind of what's going on day to day in my crazy world.
Yeah, I do the same thing. I actually, and it's not really intentional. I avoid some of the entrepreneurial, the stuff people would think that I'm into, you know, like the Shark Tank. Like I don't like watching Shark Tank. I don't like, you know, some of these shows, some of these podcasts.
To get your mind like spinning.
Well, and it's just too close. It's kind of like I'm living that. Like I don't need more of that. You know, I want other things. So I'm the same way. I read a bunch of disparate stuff. Well, that's fantastic advice. I appreciate the share. Last question. Any advice you'd give your young 20-year-old Stacy, you know, that might help you save 25 years from your own path, you know?
Oh my God. I probably would have told myself to get a little more sleep. And I think I would have told myself to get sort of more management training earlier in my career. Because I think that it was just such a different time, but if it were now, I'd say that is like really, really important to have that like executive coaching and management training so that you are I always feel like I could be a better manager of people.
Says the CEO of one of the most successful fashion businesses out there right now. That's
I have a partner who helps with a lot of that.
As do I, by the way.
Yes, but like, I think that I definitely would have given myself that advice to just be a little better and to also like, you know, the first few years when I started my company, I'm starting a new brand right now, but like, and I've been really insistent on like the branding of it before we launch. When Alice and Olivia started, I basically like made my own logo and was like, let's go, and really didn't brand the interiors and concepts and, you know, and logos and all that until later. So I always tell people when they're starting, like, you really want to have a solid core to your brand when you start for any industry.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would have encouraged myself to have some management training. I think my management training was probably like on rollerblades from like factory to showroom.
Was it neon on rollerblades?
I had some good colors, definitely good colors.
Stacy, anything you want to plug? Anything coming up? Anything?
No, I mean, I have a new brand launching in the fall that I'm really excited about. It's a team concept. It's kind of, we're
Exciting.
calling it like sleepwear meets streetwear. It's sort of like pajamas that you can wear all day. So it'd actually be awesome. We should definitely have some love sacks in our pop-up.
Yeah, let's do
It's
it.
called Big Feelings. Super cute and really excited about that. It launches in November. We're gonna do a little pop-up shop on the Upper East Side.
That's a great name.
Yeah, we should do.
Love
It's
it,
like
dude.
got a whole little like cozy kind of bedtime vibe to it. So
You can follow Stacey Zaidu on social media, in particular on Instagram at Allison Olivia spelled out, where her brand has about 1.5 million followers. Don't forget to like this podcast or video. Please subscribe and do share it out on social media to help others save a chunk off their own 25-year march, because you're just that kind of friend. Thank you so much to this master of mothers, the most famous female of business leaders, a fortress of fashion, diva of design, and generally really, really sweet, kind, cool person, Stacey Bendet. This was amazing. Thank you.